Have you ever found yourself in a place where it feels like the world is moving on without you? Like God has pressed pause on your life while everyone else seems to be thriving? This feeling, though unsettling, isn't new. It's something countless figures in the Bible experienced as they walked the path of faith. But here's the truth that might surprise you. Isolation, when orchestrated by God, is never meant to harm you. Instead, it's His divine way of preparing you for something far greater than you can see right now. Take Moses, for example. Before he became the great leader who freed the Israelites from slavery, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. 40 years of solitude tending sheep, away from the life of privilege he once knew. During this time, God wasn't punishing him for his past mistakes. He was preparing Moses for his ultimate purpose, to lead his people to freedom. The wilderness wasn't the end of Moses' story. It was the beginning of his transformation. Or consider Joseph, who was betrayed by his own brothers and sold into slavery. Later, he was wrongfully imprisoned for years. To the outside world, it may have seemed like Joseph's life was over. But in reality, God was using that time of isolation to refine Joseph's character and position him for a role that would save an entire nation. Isolation isn't rejection. It's a sacred separation. It's a season where God removes the noise and distractions of the world so He can speak to you directly, shape you, and prepare you for the purpose He's designed specifically for your life. So the next time you feel set apart, remember this. God isn't punishing you. He's preparing you. If we're honest, the pain of isolation can feel unbearable at times. It's in those quiet, lonely moments that doubt creeps in. Does God even hear me? Why would He allow me to feel so alone? This emotional weight isn't easy to carry, and it's something many of us wrestle with in our faith journey. But here's the good news. You're not alone in this struggle. Even some of the most faithful servants of God experience the pain of isolation. Think about David, the man after God's own heart. In the Psalms, he cried out in desperation, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" Psalm 13:1. These words reveal the raw human emotions of someone who felt abandoned and forgotten. Yet, despite his pain, David clung to God, trusting that his season of isolation had a purpose beyond what he could see. And then there's Jesus, the perfect example of enduring isolation. In the Garden of Gethsemane, moments before his arrest, he prayed in agony, saying, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Matthew 26:38. Even his closest friends couldn't fully understand the weight of what he was facing. Jesus knows what it feels like to be alone in the darkest hour, and He chooses to walk with us through ours. Isolation hurts because it strips away the comforts we once relied on. But this pain serves a purpose. It forces us to depend fully on God. When we bring our raw emotions to Him, our doubts, fears, and frustrations, He meets us with grace and uses that brokenness to build something new. Your pain is not wasted. It's the foundation for God's greater work in your life. So why does God allow isolation? Why does He lead us into these seasons of separation, where it feels like the ground has shifted beneath our feet? The answer lies in His divine purpose for our lives. Isolation is never random. It's intentional, and it serves three powerful purposes: to remove distractions, refine our faith, and prepare us for our calling. First, God isolates us to remove distractions. Our world is noisy, filled with opinions, obligations, and endless demands. Sometimes, God needs to pull us away from the chaos to refocus our hearts on Him. Think about Jesus, who frequently withdrew to solitary places to pray, Luke 5:16. Even the Son of God needed moments of isolation to commune with the Father. For us, these moments of stillness are where we can truly hear God's voice and understand His direction for our lives. Second, God isolates us to refine our faith. Like a craftsman refining silver, God uses seasons of isolation to purify our hearts and strengthen our trust in Him. The refining process isn't comfortable. It often involves trials and challenges, but it's necessary for growth. As the psalmist writes, "For you, God, tested us. You refined us like silver." Psalm 66:10. In these moments, we learn to rely on God's promises, even when we can't see the outcome. Our faith deepens as we discover that God is enough. Finally, God isolates us to prepare us for our calling. Isolation is a training ground. Before Joseph became a ruler, he endured betrayal and imprisonment. Before Paul began his ministry, he spent time in Arabia, away from the spotlight. Galatians 1:17-18. These seasons weren't wasted. They were essential for building the character, resilience, and wisdom needed for their divine assignments. If you're feeling isolated, take heart. God isn't separating you from the world to harm you. He's positioning you for something extraordinary. This is not the end. It's the preparation stage for the next chapter of your story. Trust that He's working behind the scenes, orchestrating something far greater than you can imagine. One of the hardest parts of isolation is waiting. Waiting for answers, for direction, for the breakthrough you've been praying for. It's in this waiting that doubt and impatience can start to creep in. You might find yourself asking, why is this taking so long? Has God forgotten about me? But here's the truth. God's timing is always perfect, even when it feels painfully slow to us. Consider Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a child, but years passed and nothing happened. Frustrated and doubtful, they took matters into their own hands, which only led to more heartache. But when God's timing finally came, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, the child of promise. Their waiting wasn't pointless. It was part of God's perfect plan to show that His promises are fulfilled in His time, not ours. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. While we may see waiting as wasted time, God sees it as an essential part of our journey. It's in the waiting that He works on us, teaching us patience, strengthening our faith, and aligning our hearts with His will. Trusting God's timing doesn't mean you'll never feel frustrated or anxious, but it does mean surrendering the need to control the outcome. It means believing that God knows the bigger picture, and what He's preparing for you will be worth every moment of waiting. Remember, God isn't slow, He's deliberate. Every second of your isolation is part of His perfect orchestration for your life. Instead of focusing on the clock, focus on His faithfulness. He's never late, and when His timing comes, it will exceed all your expectations. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. In fact, one of the greatest misconceptions about a season of isolation is that it's simply a pause, a time to sit still until God moves. But that's not how God operates. Even in your waiting, there is purpose. God is actively working in you and through you, shaping you for the next step of your journey. Take Noah, for example. After building the ark and surviving the flood, he had to wait for the waters to recede before stepping into a renewed earth. That waiting period wasn't passive. Noah remained faithful, continuing to trust in God's instructions and timing. Or think about Ruth, who worked diligently in the fields of Boaz while waiting for her redemption. She didn't sit idly by. She stayed faithful to the opportunities in front of her, even as God orchestrated her future. So, what does purposeful waiting look like for you? It's about using this time to deepen your relationship with God. Instead of focusing on what you don't have, focus on what you can do. Spend time in prayer, seeking His guidance. Dive into Scripture, allowing His Word to strengthen your faith. Serve others in ways that glorify Him, even in small acts of kindness. Purposeful waiting is about preparing your heart, mind, and spirit for the doors God is going to open. It's also a time to self-reflect. Ask yourself, what lessons might God be teaching me in this season? Is there an area of my life that needs refining? The waiting is often where God molds us into the person we need to be for the blessing ahead. Your waiting isn't wasted. Every moment is intentional, filled with opportunities for growth, wisdom, and preparation. When God finally moves, and He will, you'll look back on this time and realize it was never about delay. It was about destiny. What if the isolation you're experiencing is not a punishment, but a blessing in disguise? What if the very thing you're dreading is God's way of protecting and preparing you for something you can't yet see? Often, we look at isolation as a period of loss or lack, but in God's hands, it's a season of extraordinary purpose. Consider this. Sometimes, God has to close certain doors to protect you from paths that aren't meant for you. Perhaps He's pulling you out of relationships, opportunities, or environments that would have hindered your growth or distracted you from your calling. What feels like rejection is actually divine protection. In John 15:2, Jesus says, "He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." Pruning can feel painful, but it's necessary for greater fruitfulness. Isolation is also a blessing because it allows you to experience God's presence in a way that's impossible when life is filled with distractions. It's in the quiet, still moments that God reveals himself most clearly. Remember Elijah on Mount Horeb? God didn't come in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He came in a gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:11-12. Isolation creates space for that whisper, a space to hear his voice and understand his plans for your life. Finally, isolation positions you for clarity and renewal. It's an opportunity to reset, recalibrate, and realign your priorities with God's purpose. When you embrace isolation as a gift rather than a burden, you begin to see it as the foundation for the extraordinary blessings God is preparing for you. So instead of asking, "Why me?" start asking, "What is God trying to show me?" Because the blessing isn't just coming, it's already taking root in this very season. The beauty of God's plan is that his blessings often arrive when we least expect them, but exactly when we need them. After a season of isolation, when God moves, it's undeniable. Suddenly, the pieces of your story begin to make sense, and you realize that every moment of waiting, every tear shed, and every prayer whispered was preparing you for this moment. Look at Joseph's life. After years of betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, he was elevated to second in command over Egypt in a single day. Imagine the shock of going from a prison cell to the palace. God's timing is never late, and his blessings often come with such clarity and power that there's no question he was in control all along. When the blessing comes, it's important to remain humble and grateful. Recognize that the blessing isn't just for your benefit, it's meant to glorify God and bless others. Joseph's rise to power wasn't about personal gain, it was about saving an entire nation. Your blessing may look different. It could be a new opportunity, a restored relationship, or a deeper peace in your soul. Whatever it is, know this: God's blessing is always greater than what you could imagine. Hold on, because your breakthrough is closer than you think. Your season of isolation is not wasted. It's not punishment. It's God's preparation for a blessing far greater than you've imagined. He's been working behind the scenes, refining you, removing distractions, and aligning everything according to his perfect plan. The waiting may feel long, but the blessing will come, and when it does, it will be worth every moment of uncertainty and pain. Now I want to hear from you. Have you experienced a season where God used isolation to prepare you for something incredible? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how he's been working in your life. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more messages like this. Together, let's keep walking in faith and trusting God's perfect timing. Remember, God's plan is always good, and your blessing is closer than you think. Keep the faith. It's coming.